Okay, this is a super, super fun episode.
Are you not sure? No, we are very sure that it's a very fun episode. We have Nina from the naming group. If you don't know Nina's name, then you probably haven't listened to any of our podcasts before because we talk about her all the time.
Yeah, she is awesome. And we talk about naming, but naming is such a bigger kind of example of so much of branding. And I think kind of the pitfalls, the challenges, what mindset you have to have. So I think there's a lot of lessons, whether it's specific to naming or just in branding in general. And a fun
There's a lot about how to do positioning well, a lot about how to do brand well, and just sitting with discomfort. It is a mini therapy session if you want it to be. So it is super fun, and I can't wait to hear what you all think. So drop a comment or share it with somebody who's interested in naming or maybe naming their brand.
Yes, and would love to hear your comments, and what you thought of it. And for sure, give the algorithm a little love.
Hey everyone, it's Chris.
And Kirsten.
Welcome to Good Thinking Weekly, the podcast where we discuss the best of the best in brands, marketing, and culture.
Thousands of people, top execs from the likes of Complex, Klaviyo, Walmart, Wall Street Journal, and LVMH tune in every single week.
We run a creative consultancy in GoodCo, so we know what it takes to build a good brand.
Subscribe on YouTube, your favorite podcast app, and Good Thinking on Substack for more.
All right, let's dive in.
And welcome to Good Thinking.
And welcome Nina, who is maybe a somewhat celebrity on the podcast. If you listen regularly, you know Nina's name because I mention her every time we talk about naming. And so here we have Nina, the naming expert that we always refer to. Nina, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
We're so happy to have you on. You want to give a little overview, a little background of, we've kind of shared your expertise, but get into it a little bit more?
Sure, totally. So I am the principal and founder of the Naming Group. We are an LA-based naming agency. We have named things that you own, have tasted, have touched. So things like the Chevy Sonic, we've named printers for Epson, a whole bunch of other things. We did shoe naming for Reebok. So we really specialize not just in developing individual names, but naming systems. So anything from naming architecture to helping major organizations build out their naming practices. So I'm sure we'll get into some of that today, but naming is to the point where, the lines are starting to blur between like organizational psych and naming. And that's where we love to be.
Yeah. And we've named things together.
Yes,
we can attest to Nina's brilliance and how fun it is to work with Nina. So if you're in the naming needs business, then this is the person you talk to.
This is for you.
Right on.
But even if you're not, I'm so excited to have this conversation because I think so few people really understand naming, and it's so it encompasses so many different aspects, I think, of a brand, and it's so I think really digging into the process, what makes a great name, kind of all of the parts and pieces, I'm just excited to be able to share with people and for people to learn and for myself.
So my first question was like, and we talk about bad naming quite a bit on the podcast.
Yes, we do.
Always lamenting the fact that you're not there to help us. And so before we get into what makes a bad name or a, not so good name, what makes a great name? Tell us.
Yeah, totally.
Get into it.
So I was thinking about this, and really what it comes down to is, does the name do its job? So that is like what the naming group, that's what we are singularly obsessed with, is like coming up with a job description for the name. So I think there's definitely some general things that make a name stickier or more memorable. But when you are coming up with a name that needs to be marketed to millions of people in different languages across different markets, it needs to be evergreen and last absolutely over decades. You really need to make sure that it's doing its job. So I'll probably end up talking a lot about naming criteria today, which is basically the 3 to 5 things that the name has to accomplish. We're all three of us here very familiar with this. I have indoctrinated you all into our process with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And go ahead. I was going to say something, but you say something.
I mean, so in a good name, so are there, and it doing its job, is the job description always unique to the particular opportunity, the particular kind of task at hand, the particular project? And are there some kind of evergreen elements, or is it just literally being evergreen and being able to stand the test?
Great question. So yes, the criteria should be absolutely specific to the project and what we're naming. Everything else, the more general pieces, which I'll come back to in a moment, they're more table stakes. So like, is it available for trademark? Everybody needs to clear that bar. Is it translatable across your key markets? Does it not mean screw you in like your second most important global market? So yeah, those kinds of things are table stakes. And it's really interesting because clients will often come to the table with a long list of naming criteria. And one of the first things we do is separate out like, okay, these are givens, and these ones are actually really good starting points for like a very specific thing about the project. So I'll give you an example of a project specific is we will look at competitors' names in the space and plot them out in terms of what types of names they are. So we named Greenhouse the hiring software. And when we were doing our competitive analysis on that, there was just all of these super boring descriptive names, like with the word hire and talent in them. And nobody was really going for that like juicy metaphorical space. Nobody was like taking that brand risk. So we were able to actually identify on that matrix the literal white space and say, like, let's play in here, let's get in there. And to your other point, Kirsten, the things that are more generally important about names or sort of what makes them sticky, a few things come to mind. One is, I love talking about this one. My friend and master namer Anthony Shore introduced me to this research on taglines, actually, that said that the taglines that are most likable are not always the most memorable. And so it's this really interesting, and that definitely applies to naming too, where like, I mean, you can see that even in people where it's like, if you're just a doormat and you're just like kind of nice and boring, like nobody's going to remember you. So I think that's a really important sort of general part of what makes a name memorable or sticky is like, you kind of have to ruffle feathers a little bit.
Yeah.
Now that's different from sometimes names have to be descriptive. Like if the job of the name is naming a feature, you don't want to confuse people. It should just kind of like fly under the radar. Then it shouldn't be, unlikable. It should just be very basic. So this is where we get into everybody's like individual lane as a name.
Yeah. I mean, I will say naming is by far, and we work in a lot, like half the time, everybody in this world called brand is working as a therapist, like half the time. But you are doing some very, very hard work, I feel like, as a therapist, because people will come in and say like, oh, like I like this and I feel this, and you'll present names and people will have the most visceral reaction to naming. We've had visceral reactions to campaigns. We've had visceral reactions to brand, especially if you change someone's brand and it's like, wow, that's a big change. Like that can be really striking. Nothing compares to the intensity of that people feel around names. And it's so personal. Like, even if it's not personal to people, people's reasons for finding it offensive are always personal. Like, they're always like, this guy, Dean, like, Dean was my bully in, like, second grade, and, like, I can't call anything with a D. Like,
and
it's
his
just
favorite color was red, and so we can't have red in the name.
Well, percent. But I
real.
think that's why naming is so interesting of a conversation, because I think it encompasses so much that goes into a brand. And I think the quote that you pointed out, I think is perfect, because what makes the most, what is most likable in a brand across the board is oftentimes what's not the most memorable necessarily. And I think to understand that, and obviously naming comes quite early on in the process, because you can't really create a brand without it, that I think it's so interesting that you kind of have that jolt. You have, you're kind of giving clients like, this is it. This is kind of where the rubber meets the road at such an early point that they do have this shock. And, it's like naming a kid or naming a pet. Like people have a lot of feelings about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I have so many things to say. First of all, I'm on like a crusade to get people to stop comparing brand naming to naming their kid. I'll tell you why.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, right. The one place where it does really overlap is, both of you have children, did you tell people beforehand when you were pregnant what you were going to name the kid?
No.
You can't.
I mean,
You can't.
no,
You absolutely can't.
Everybody will
Yeah.
have an opinion, which is why
Everyone
you
will
don't
have an
do it.
opinion. Yes. But then when the baby is born and you say, like, here's Gertrude, nobody's going to say anything. They're just going to be
No.
like, great,
Oh, my
she's
dad
adorable.
did. My dad totally did.
Of
My
course
dad
he
goes,
did.
Harriet? And I was like, first of all, that's the fucking cutest name in the world, and I won't hear a thing about it. But he was like, it's a bit old-fashioned, don't you think? Everybody has an opinion. Everybody.
The worst stakeholders. The worst. Parents are the
That's a
worst
great point.
stakeholders. Yes.
Yes.
But the reason why I'm trying to break that is because you don't have to market Harriet to millions of people across all global markets. And you didn't need to make sure there was no other Harriets in her, I guess the metaphor would be like, instead of goods and services, like in the class of person that like Harriet is like,
Right.
you have to make sure there's no other Harriets. Like there's so many other hoops that you have to jump through. So,
Yeah.
they're so different.
Yeah. Like children, I do think, no, I'm joking. But I also think that like one of the things, and I wrote about this and I sent you this article before we talked today, was like Zoe Scammon was talking about how she uses naming to kind of set a trajectory, not just for positioning, but also for a way of thinking about things, right?
Yes.
And I think that that's something that you do really well. And I'm totally going off course of our questions, but we'll come back to the questions.
Here
But
we are.
like, I think that one thing that is really, if you do naming really well, it acts as a catalyst for decisions. So you can have a strategy, like we've worked together and said, hey, like this is the general, like, this is the positioning that we're going after. These are our values. You mandate that in your onboarding anyway, but we do that work and we like to do that work. But I think one of the things that you do is you kind of like give names that like take that and help brands, in my opinion, when you start to see the names that do really well, like it's like, yes, you had a position and you had an idea, but the name can kind of like be like, it's like shooting a dart out in like a much further direction and add even more clarity to that positioning, or like even more oomph or excitement or energy. And I think obviously it can inform the branding, but like more than just the branding, it's like it informs where the company goes, And I think that's excellent.
Yeah.
I think
ahead,
that's
Kirsten.
well said. I got to get this in because it's just a total plug for you, but it's like, as Chris is describing that, I'm like, yeah, like that's exactly it. When and this is the only trusted partners that we work with do this, and you do this so well. Like when we work with somebody, when we collaborate on a brand, we are very thoughtful about the strategy and all of the parts and pieces. And we're not just looking to create together a name that solves that. We're looking for like to add to that. And it's additive in what you do, and it takes it to a next level. And I think that's something that's very, very hard to do, because I think a lot of people that do this work do a name that's kind of fit the brief and not fit the brief and then some.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that is so born out of like so many of our inquiries that come in, whether it's from a startup or from a corporation, will come in and say, like, we had this name, it did its job for the first 5 years, and now it just doesn't make sense anymore. Like it's this tiny little sweater that's like shrunk and we're like busting out of it. And so, we just got through a project now helping rename a startup. Their original name was Vaccess. They were really focused on vaccines. Fast forward, they're not focused on that as much anymore. They're sort of broadening their horizons, and we had to rename them. So yeah, I think it's just sort of like built in now to our approach to naming. And then something else I was thinking of as you were talking, Chris, too, you were talking about how you will supply the positioning and sort of the brand strategy. Like this is me plugging in Goodco, because it's just like, the way that I describe it is, and this came from a project with Rachel Robert Maddox, who you both know on the board.
Yeah.
Incredible to work with. And on that project, the level of position, the like just the level of precision and beauty and perfection of the positioning and brand strategy, which is exactly the level that you produce at, it felt like somebody had gone to the farmer's market and they had gotten all the most beautiful ingredients. they like chopped them up. It was like mise en place. Like they would just sort of set this entire beautiful counter and they were like, here, like cook us up a name. And it doesn't always work like that. Like a lot of times I'll just get like a weird bag of moldy carrots and be like, all right, got to come up with something. So it is such a joy to work with partners that create this like beautiful place from which to do our work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when it all goes right, you can really feel it going right. All right. So to that end, like, and we talked a little, so we didn't actually ask the question, but I think we've answered the question of like, why is naming hard? But I think, what do people like misunderstand about naming most often? Like when you kind of bring somebody on, and I feel like you work with sometimes pretty seasoned people, like there's naming people inside of these big organizations and you might be helping them, or you're working with people who've never done it before and maybe there are different mistakes that people are making. But what are the kind of misunderstandings that you find the most often?
Yeah, totally. So a few things. I think just very baseline, most important thing is just that it is harder than people think it's going to be. And so, I wouldn't have a job if it weren't so hard. Like there wouldn't be a like small but growing industry of agencies and consultants devoted only to this if it were really easy. So I think just the people coming in sort of think, okay, I'm going to be able to just do this myself. A lot of times, that's less seasoned people, to your point, Chris, but just that naming is harder. I think the other thing that gets underestimated, and this happens a lot on the corporate side when there's a lot of decision makers, is the assumption that like a core working team, whether they're working on their own or working with us or another agency, will be able to come up with a lot of options and then take them to their decision maker at the very end and say, what do you think? And just the evolutionary psychology that's built into us is that exec at the very end, you're basically showing them like a tiger in the woods. Like they're just like, oh my God, I've never seen this before. What is this? So I think that's one of the things that's most underestimated, that we really help train people. And even with startups and, individuals where they're trying to name something, if there's any other decision makers that need to weigh in at any point, bring them on board, not necessarily as a peanut gallery to always be giving input, but just expose them to where you're going, because humans thrive when there's just enough familiarity to make them comfortable. One other thing too, and you made me think of this earlier, Chris, is are you all familiar with Daniel Kahneman, the book Thinking Fast and Slow?
No.
I know the book.
Incredible.
I didn't know that's his name, but that's not surprising because I can't remember names, which is why it's funny that we're even on this podcast.
So, in a nutshell, there might even be another author in the book. I don't remember, but he's sort of the main dude. And he breaks down our minds, our brains, into having two systems of thought. There's system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the faster thinking, and system 2 is the slower, more like critical thought. This is just like very Cliff Notes explanation. And so what happens, our system 1 often kicks in and is just sort of like the instinct. It's like what keeps us safe. And the system 2 is what allows us to sort of make these better, more considered decisions. And as you all know, like brand building is just like constantly switching back and forth between those and watching what our client is doing and tuning into like, are they thinking like kind of assumptively or are they thinking more critically? And that comes up with naming, where like when you present new names to a client, they're immediately engaged in system 1. Like, I don't know, I've never seen it before, I'm not sure how I feel. But they're also coming in with the thought that like, I'm going to be enchanted. I'm going to see this incredible name that I've never seen before and I'm going to love it. And the truth of the matter is, and I think Zoe Scammon said this in her piece too, is that like names are born over time. You have to become really familiar and comfortable with them. So much of the work that we end up doing, and this is what is sort of underestimated about naming, is having people sort of slow down and think like with their system too. Like look at the names from the point of view of like, is this name achieving what I want it to? Is this name producing like just the right amount of discomfort to catch people's attention, but not so much discomfort that they have like a disgust reaction, basically.
Nailed it. Nailed it. I think that's exactly it. And I got a lot of questions on this theory that we can talk about after. Like, does everybody have a system 1 and system 2?
Right, I was going to say, I was like, Kirsten's just in system 1 all the time.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have a system 2, but we can talk about that later. But I think, again, this is a great example for all of branding. Like, I think this is part of it. And I think it's more obvious and maybe stronger in naming because it's early and it's so big and so important and all the things. But I think this is something that happens throughout, like of kind of in the way in which something is presented and not just kind of a shock value. The tiger is a great example. But I think also, again, the way in which we've presented, the way in which you share naming is like there's a story behind it and it's real. It's real. There's reasoning behind it and there's strategy and there's thought and there's all of these parts and pieces that kind of take you to this place. And I think that's really, really important as well and helps to kind of transition those if, say, most people have system 1 and system 2.
Right.
Yes.
I would agree with that. And I would say, like, we've worked with other namers. We won't name them. And I think one of the differences is that I think when you can have a description for a name, but then there's also like a picture painting of the name. And I think that's kind of more what you do. And I think it's less about a description and it's, again, like you're kind of you give it the little like job description. It's like, it's not necessarily a job description, but it's kind of gives you like this is why this is great. And, it's like a little bit thought provoking, right? And we always say like, Kirsten's like, print it out. And I was like, yeah, like stick it on your phone or like have it like whatever it is. Like, I think you do have to kind of get familiar with it. It is interesting, like with some of the people, and you've talked about this before, like one thing, and we've talked about, like, I was like, why do big companies struggle? And maybe this isn't so much big companies, but one thing I've seen, and you've talked about this, is placeholder names and like how much trouble these cause.
Yeah.
In this particular process, because a lot of people come to us and they're like, I'm thinking that it's going to be named after my child, right? Like, whatever. Like, it's like some combination of the letters of their children, or like it's a place where they went to school, or who knows, whatever. Like, they all, like, it's a river that the city, like, the placeholder names that we have received over time have been universally terrible. But one of the things that's interesting about it is that they're universally terrible and yet universally become beloved because they are committed to, but then they become familiar. So they become familiar over time, but you get okay with it because you're like, oh, well, it won't matter. Like, we're going to change the name. So they're just like, well, name it microphone. Like, that's fine. And then they've said microphone for the last 8 months, referring to it as they're going through like pitch decks or whatever it is. And then suddenly you come along with like all these other names. And it is actually like, it's almost like they're changing their names even when they haven't had a name. And you wrote an article about like how to avoid that. And I think if you can touch on it just quickly, because I do think that is a pitfall that many people.
Totally. Yes. So I think the best example I have of this is years ago, we were asked to name butt wipes, which is why I love my job. Like, we have named rocket science, like we have named literal plasma propulsion rockets, but we have also named butt wipes. And on this butt wipe project, the code name was Viper, like as in the incredibly dangerous snake.
Snake, right.
And by
wanting
like nothing you want near your butt, nothing you want near. No. And at some point, partway through the project, somebody was like, well, couldn't Viper work? Like, just really very seriously. And so it's incredible, like how sitting with something breeds, like familiarity breeds, liking something, affinity. And it's such a problem that part of the work we do when we're doing large scale naming operations at corporations is we talk with them about their code naming system. And we ask them, like, how do code names get generated? Who generates them? How often have you all sort of become attached to a code name? Because a lot of times the code name will be so strong that I've heard stories where, and I have seen this before, where like the ultimate decision maker will say like, well, it's not bad. Like, it's okay. It just sounds kind of like what it is. And that's a name like Pinnacle or like Atlas or just like these very generally positive names. And it's like, is that really our bar? Like, is that our brief? Is like, it's not terrible. So we are brought in a lot of times to help unpack that, and then we will help, and this is where part of my job is really fun, come up with these like formulas and systems for how to generate absolutely ridiculous code names. So not so ridiculous that people aren't going to feel comfortable saying it, but it has to be a name that people would never be comfortable using. So one of our major clients is a huge QSR, fast food brand in the US, and they have very descriptive names. It's their overall naming strategy. And so we designed a code naming system for them where the code names are a little silly, like they're a little kooky. And so that safeguards against issues that they have been running up against, which is that the code name was making it to market, but it wasn't really the right name ultimately. So it's a big thing to be aware of. I'm glad you brought that up, Chris.
That's a great hack.
Yeah, I think I just like how like it's like, okay, like, and also like, I think it's such an easy mistake to fall into, and then you don't realize like how attached you be. Like we've seen it so many times that people just become so attached to these names, and you're like, guys, you made this up when you went to register your company and you were just looking for a name. Like, this is not how you name a business. So,
and
yes,
I think like what's interesting is that like people don't like that sort of like elixir of familiarity becomes so intense that they're not even able to say, I think I really like this because I'm familiar. It just becomes, I think I really like this because I think it's actually good.
For sure.
Like,
that's the worst. That's the worst part.
They don't have that framing. They don't have that reference. And I think, we have this huge kind of naming, at the beginning of the decks, as far as like, here's what to avoid, here's what to think, and kind of just getting people psychologically there.
Yeah.
And it's like, you go through that and people still like, don't absorb that information and don't kind of take that in and like, no, this is how you really have to look at a naming and how you have to really get in there. Everything just goes out the fucking window and you just go like, well, do I like it or do I not like it? Would I name my kid it? Would I not name my kid it?
Right. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about this naming criteria, because we kind of danced around it a little bit. And like, I think obviously we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of it because it's robust and it literally will take us like the whole hour to discuss. But like, what do you think are I know what are the main components of it, and what are if you, other than working with you, like what's the one thing that you feel like, again, like listen to this, like make sure you're thinking about this when you're thinking about a name or when you're thinking about a naming person, partner, what is it?
Yeah.
So anyway,
totally. So with naming criteria, there's sort of general guardrails to that. I can talk you through some of that. Basically, naming is very much in so many ways like you're funneling down to one or two words. And so one of the criteria needs to be like, what is your essence? So basically taking your value prop and narrowing that down to essentially like a phrase, because it's just a precursor to like narrowing this down to one word essentially. So like the raison d'etre, the meaty middle. We also want to look at tone. And this is where the work that you all do when you hand this along to me, where that becomes so important, is getting a sense for like, who's our audience? What are they going to react well to? Are we trying to appeal to investors and end consumers? Is it other businesses? So making sure that our tone is on point. Then, as I mentioned in my example prior with Greenhouse, we want to be looking at white space for the type of name that it is. Like, is it better for it to be a more descriptive name, like the naming group? Is it better for it to be a more empty vessel name, like Hulu? Is it better for it to be something in the middle that's kind of more suggestive? Are people really going ham on compound names where they're like smashing two words together, and we kind of want to veer away from that? At the same time, there's often projects where you actually see a trend and want to move towards it. So like, let's say you're in one category and it's starting to get kind of busy with a certain name type, but you actually want to start to be associated with another category. Like, let's look at the naming there and see if there's anything we can kind of aspire to. A lot of times part of the naming criteria is like, there's packaging constraints or there's regulatory concerns. So these just like rules that we kind of have to live by. And then I give a lot of credit to my colleague, John Elliott, for sort of shaping our thinking this way. is a linguist with a background in how language changes over time. So looking at, like, part of our criteria is looking at like temporal considerations, which we all talked about earlier. Like, what story or what sort of platform is this name going to create that will allow us to grow and change over time? Essentially, like, what is going to be truly evergreen? Because as we've talked
don't
about,
name everything lore. That would be probably
yeah,
like maybe
Right.
like
totally.
rule number 1.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. So yeah, truly extensible. And what does that look like? You had like 3 other questions, and
I don't know.
bring me back.
Mainly it was like kind of like what's the most important part. But I think before we move on to that, like you talk a lot, and again, I sent you this other article. And it's like, once I have a,
Thank God, Chris, like, you are
something in my
little
head, I'm like,
RSS feed.
Yeah. She's
It's great.
everybody's
I don't
RSS.
have to do any work.
It's but the cut was talking about how like so many people are like naming, it's like Skylar this, like drop a vowel here, like, and they're like, oh, I'm doing it because of the trademarking. And I think you talk a lot about kind of like made up names, and you have all these great like different kinds of names. And why do you feel like, people seem to think that the only way you can like make it around a trademarking issue is to like lose every vowel in the name? Like, and how do we avoid that for everyone on this call? Because we don't need any more of those. Like, no more.
We might need another hour.
Yeah, the trademark thing is big, but yeah, that's definitely.
Yeah, I think so like the misspelling and like the dropping of the vowels, and oh my God, I think what's interesting is that a lot of times, even if you drop vowels or you misspell things, if consumers are likely to pronounce it in the same way as a word, even if you had all those vowels, a trademark attorney is going to see through that and say, like, nice try, but the trademark office exists actually to protect consumers from confusion. And so you think of it like that, it's like, if they're going to be confused, even if you just drop the vowels, you might not make it through with that. I think what is interesting in something like everybody's talking about Siren, Sydney Sweeney's brand, which I am deigning to even pronounce it like that because it's really not intuitive. It's like SYRN. They're banking on people basically saying like, this is Sydney Sweeney's brand because nobody can really pronounce it, which like it does something, it gets you talking about that. So it achieves that. I think what they're not considering is when, I talked a lot about how like branding is very much about deciding what patterns you're going to uphold and which ones you're going to gently break. And I say gently because you want to break a pattern to sort of draw somebody's attention in. And then once they're in, you sort of build back trust again by managing expectations or upholding patterns that they're comfortable with. And that very much comes through in naming. And I think breaking the code of like general how words are built and pronounced like that, for me, I think is kind of a bridge too far, where people are like, and they can sort of see through that it's like coming from this big corporation, and they can see the like audacity of like removing those vowels. I think that consumers are sort of smarter than that, and they can see that, and they just sort of are turned off by that. And so I look at it as, a bridge too far, breaking trust with people. So I lost the plot. What was your original?
I think you answered it. I think you answered the whole plot. I think you got to the plot.
I have one other point to make about that. So
okay.
I think a lot of that obsession with like, removing words and having these alternative spellings also goes back to people's fixation on having a one-word brand. Like, I can't tell you how many clients come in the door and they're like, whatever it is, I only want it to be one word. And with trademark, like, all the real words are taken. Every brand is really pushing for that single word because they're like, it's more memorable the shorter it is, the easier the recall is. But there's so many brilliant brands that aren't just one word, like Liquid Death, Blue Apron. Like, there's just what people I think aren't thinking of is that when the name, like Liquid Death is a great example, it catches your attention. It's 2 words, but the words aren't very long. Like, it just feels like it's already a name. And so I think the fact that it just doesn't always have to be one word. And I think siren and like sacred is one from Beyonce, but it kind of looks like a weird, like Gaelic word that nobody can say, is this built on this fixation with like, well, I don't even care if it's pronounceable. It just simply has to be one word. And like, let me say that we can let that go.
Yeah. There are other ways to deal with this. Yes. Yeah. I think that probably brings up I had in here like AI trend, naming trends. And I feel like one in the AI space is to just be like, oh, well, we'll take a one word name that's not available, open, and we'll just shove AI onto it at the end. And then it's like, oh, we got it. And now everyone has decided that is how you name things in AI.
Mm-hmm.
And what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm stoked because, like, in 5 years, I'm going to have so much business, which is like...
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love the optimism. It's so true, though. I mean, like, honestly, it's a disease and everybody has it. And then when you're going to come in and have to cure everybody, it's going to be great.
Coming to Dr. Nina.
Right. Talking about AI, I think a lot of people these days, myself included, to do things like are like, oh, I can do it myself. Like, fire up Claude Code, let's go. And what are your feelings? I mean, obviously, you don't recommend it because you're in the business of naming things yourself. But like, what is it? Or maybe you do. Like, what is it that you think people should be using AI for in naming, and what are they doing wrong? Because, like, quite honestly, I've seen a lot of bad names, and I'm thinking that mostly ChatGPT is responsible for these things.
Yeah, probably more and more now. Yeah.
Yes.
So we use AI. We absolutely use AI. Like, totally not against it. Let's drink every time we mention Zoe Scaman. She talked about AI as a whetstone, like kind of honing your... I love that. And that's exactly right. Like, what AI allows us to do as an agency in terms of like the depth of weird competitive analysis. Like, I will go into Chat or Claude and say, can you bring up skincare brands that utilize Romance language roots and ideally are a compound name? I would have that thought 5 years ago, but I would basically just be like, oh, wouldn't that be nice if I had the time to look for those examples? Right. And so all that to say that we absolutely use AI, but we use it as a research tool. Like, it's just not good enough at naming yet. Maybe in the future it could be, but there's when I have tried to ask it like, hey, will you just come up with some names for this and sort of put in the brief, the output just isn't there. Sometimes it will be really great inspo and like really nice jumping off points for when I'm actually trying to develop names. But what I say to people is, if they are embarking on naming themselves and they say like, I'm going to use AI, I will say, come up with your naming criteria, like come up with the guardrails for your name and use AI to help you develop that. So like I mentioned before, ask Chat like, hey, what are the top competitors in my field? Get a list of 20 of those and then ask it to analyze that list of 20, saying like, how many of these are compound names? Which ones are suggestive, and sort of see if you can identify trends that way, but actually asking it to just straight up develop names for you. And it can't do that. And the other part of our work that it has not figured out is how to get 12 executives aligned on a single word. So
if it can figure that out, like, sign me up.
If it ever figures that out, that's the thing. Like, I mean, and even getting it to agree with its own self. I mean, like, the sycophancy of ChatGPT or any of them is a reason not to name anything with it, because the whole time it'll be like, that is the unlock. You have cracked the code. That is the name of the
That's the one.
Yeah, Chat's like, have you considered being a naming agency before? Yeah.
Right. Yes, exactly. But it's almost like that is, or like exactly against the thing that you were talking about, which is like the discomfort, right? Like, there's no, even in Claude Code, which is much less like sycophantic in general, it will be like, that's the answer. The end, like if you push it 3-4 times, it'll just be like, I think you got it. And it just can't like get to the point where it like understands discomfort, you know? And I think that will always be the thing that when you're much of what you deal with C-suite executives is dealing with helping them through something that's uncomfortable because branding and positioning and naming and moving your entire corporation in one direction is an uncomfortable feeling for many people, but that needs to have a discomfort. Like if you think it feels comfortable, you are not working hard enough. Like it is, it should feel little bit frightening. Like everything great in life should feel a little bit frightening when you do it. And I think that naming and branding and positioning should feel uncomfortable, and AI is not very good at helping you find that space.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. And I think, you know, again, it comes through in all of branding, but for executives, for people to really be able to lean into the discomfort of it and be okay with that, that's where the magic comes from.
Which is why I feel like we're all, I forget which one of you mentioned it, but it's just like,
it's probably Chris.
We are all therapists. Probably Chris. We are all like therapists, and I don't want to say that. We're not all therapists. Like that's a different field, but I feel like there's so many of us as practitioners that have a real appreciation for the type of like growth, change, and transformation that occurs in this work. One of my favorite quotes is, "We all teach what we seek to learn." And that I feel like is so much of this is like, I get to come in at these like really early sort of like inherently mercurial phases of like, are we going to be this? Are we going to be this? I'm not sure. And get people stoked on what they could possibly become, like, or what this brand could possibly be. I mean, it's an honor, honestly.
And it's an optimistic place to sit. It's really fun to do, but it does come with a lot of discomfort.
Yes, it does. I mean, I feel like we're perfectly segued now into quickfire.
All right, let's do it. Time flies, man. I love chatting with friends. It makes it so easy.
So good.
All right, Kirsten, take it away.
All right, Nina, 3 things every brand should do.
Number 1, building off what we just said, make people a little uncomfortable. Number 2, first thing that comes to mind, use color well. Like it's something that's really underestimated and I think is so powerful, but you know, thinking about what color is going to be most impactful. I think Claude is an amazing example of that and their visual identity. Like it could have been so boring and gray and black and white, and they went for like terracotta and sort of pulled in like, you know, this element of humanity to their visuals. So, okay, third thing, I think, gosh, I don't know. Know what you're good at and know what you're not good at. And bring in experts to do what you're not good at. All right, 3.
Love that. What's the trend that has you the most excited?
We just did a big analysis on naming in beauty and skincare and put that up on LinkedIn. It was so fun to dive into that. And I think the naming that's happening in those spaces and how those categories are sort of collapsing and the like poetry, there's like this visceral sort of poetry coming out of that space. Dew and gloss and things like that. And a colleague of mine, Yana, was pointing out that skincare and beauty naming back in like the 90s and 80s and things like that was about like anti-aging and like women need to like change and fit in this box and erase this line. And now a lot of that is just sort of like, it's getting like kind of wackadoo and weird. And it's about like kind of this like sensuality. So I love that just from like what that's inviting women to feel like that use those products.
Totally. That's a great unlock. And
good
I feel
job
like naming
description.
does that. Yeah.
Yeah. Feel good.
Yeah. I'm here for that. What's the one thing many brands get wrong and who gets it right?
So I think what I'm seeing, and this is also something I'm really excited about, is that a lot of brands will tuck the job of naming underneath somebody's role that is branding. So like a brand strategist also is responsible for like naming across an entire part of the portfolio. And what we are now seeing, because of the pace of business accelerating as it is, there needs to be, in large organizations more often than not, a person whose job title has naming in it, that they are just solely responsible for that. We're seeing that more and more. Ford Motor Company is building out a naming practice. Like within the past 2 years, they've brought on people with naming in the title. You're seeing that at like SAP, CVS. And as we've talked about with all the different hoops that names have to jump through, like you kind of need a full-time person when you are a major corporation. So that's something that I'm really stoked about, is that naming is being built as a center of excellence across different major brands now.
I love that.
Very cool.
Amazing. Well, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you, talk through. I mean, we absolutely love working with you. So this has been great. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
All right. Ciao for now.
Ciao.
That was it for this episode of Good Thinking. Don't forget to tune in next week.
If you found this valuable, subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast app.
And don't forget to read on Substack for even more insights.
And if you really liked it, drop us a heart. We'd love to hear from you.
Ciao. Until next time.